Hello, I'm Adam Wren.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Tuesday, August 12th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Good morning, Dasha. Welcome back. So good to have you here.
Good morning. Nice to be back, although it was great to be fully off grid and completely unreachable to all of you for a hot minute. But I missed everyone. I'm glad to be back.
Well, we missed you, and we're glad to have you back as well. But let's get right to what's driving the day. The big story, again, is in Washington and the fallout from President Donald Trump's decision to have the federal government take an aggressive role in policing Washington, D.C. Yesterday, we told you about the sort of escalating series of options at President Trump's disposal if he wanted to take up the pressure on the city. Well, at his press conference yesterday morning, he outlined exactly what he intended to do. He is effectively taking over the city's police department for 30 days and is deploying the National Guard, about 800 troops in total, to Washington. Dasha, you were in the room.
Yeah, a very packed, very hot, kind of smelly briefing room. To be honest with you, it was really crazy.
What was the mood like from the president? Was he determined? I mean, how would you describe it?
He was seizing the moment. I mean, he was very excited about how full the room was, and he was flanked by more than half a dozen of his cabinet members to whom he gave the floor at different points in the briefing to outline their steps. I mean, everything that I had heard from folks inside the White House was that this had been planned across these various departments between Pam Bondi at DOJ and Hegseth with the Pentagon and the National Guard and Dan Driscoll, the Army Secretary, and of course, Judge Jeanine Pirro, who had her moment in the spotlight today as well. This has been a coordinating process that they were working on to roll it out in this exact fashion. As soon as we walked into the briefing room, we were given these pamphlets with charts, which the president loves, and examples of folks that had been arrested over the weekend. So this is really a process that culminated with this briefing room moment that the president really indulged in yesterday.
It's interesting to me, you mentioned that he was really excited for the crowd. And one of the main criticisms that Democrats have had of this move has been that it's essentially an effort to distract from both the economy, what they call the unpopularity of the big, beautiful bill, and also the Epstein files fallout. Are you getting the sense that that was kind of the subtext from your sources about all this?
Well, it's funny because even in the room, he made a couple of jokes about how big the crowd was, and that, of course, it meant that we were all there because we were all passionate about the idea of crime in Washington. But he said that with a little bit of a smirk, knowing that, of course, he was going to get questions, and he did, about a range of other topics. No one I've talked to in the White House has directly connected this to a distraction from other things. However, and I think, Adam, you and Mike talked about this a little bit, and you wrote about this quite articulately. This does put the White House on comfortable footing, right? This law and order messaging is a safe space for President Trump. And it's a way for Republicans and for the president to try to put Democrats on the back foot or on the other side of an issue that they feel is more cut and dry for Americans than how Democrats want to display it. Whether or not that's a reality and that's a political tactic that will work, I think is up for debate. But certainly it has been a pattern that Republicans have used in the past. And President Trump in particular does want to be the sort of law and order president. He wants to be the guy that is fighting against any sort of leftist anti-police sentiment, really rallying the troops, literally in this case. So it's safe ground for him.
Yeah, and that brings us to the second big story, how Democrats are responding at this moment in time and the sort of high wire act they face at this moment. They want to keep the focus on the Epstein files and the uncertain jobs report. And yesterday you saw a number of prominent Democrats say that basically this was a distraction from that. Given that, I'm kind of curious how potential 2028 Democratic presidential candidates are responding. So did kind of a quick rundown here. You have Wes Moore, governor of Maryland, potential 2028 candidate. He has probably released the most comprehensive statement on all of this. And essentially, he says President Trump's decision to mobilize the National Guard to conduct municipal policing in D.C. lacks seriousness and is deeply dangerous. And he invokes his own service troops in uniform. And as the commander and the chief of the Maryland Guard, he talks about his wins as a public safety official in Maryland. You look at Pete Buttigieg, he calls this dangerous. He says it's not making DC safer and says it's a pretext for this to happen in other cities, quote, maybe your city, end quote. And then you have Gavin Newsom, who is essentially saying that what Trump did in LA was a warm up act for this. And so, I'm curious, like, do you think Democrats are sort of avoiding taking the volume up to 11 and really biting at Trump's trap that he laid out here?
Taking the bait? Yeah, I think that right now, the message from Democrats has largely been a criticism of overreach on the part of the president, claims of authoritarianism, of dictatorial kind of leadership. And I think that that is safer ground for Democrats than going into the argument around crime statistics, right? Because if you ask most voters, even if crime statistically is going down, if they're seeing crime in their neighborhoods, like they don't want their politicians saying, don't worry about the crime, right? If they do feel less than safe wherever they live. I am curious though, Adam, I know you did so much reporting about the ways that the left kind of felt tone deaf around inflation and the economic issue. Is this a tight rope that they have to walk now to avoid falling into that trap with the crime issue?
Yeah, I think it is a tightrope. And I think that they're walking very carefully here because if you look back at how Democrats talked about inflation in 2021, 2022, even 2023 and 2024, they said it was transitory. They said that, inflation had been felt by every global economy across the map as a result of COVID, and that the US was doing better on that point than others. But that wasn't really like a Bill Clinton, I feel your pain statement.
Yeah.
It was one that tried to marshal facts, albeit perhaps true, but it didn't really connect with what the perceived feeling of the median voter was. And I think that's a real risk here for Democrats to do the same thing where they sort of like, well, actually this, without acknowledging shortcomings. And I thought there was a marked difference between the way that Mayor Muriel Bowser responded to this with a real seriousness and a real acknowledgement that crime and public safety could improve. And some national Democratic pundits who just wanted to talk about the cold, hard statistics.
I think traveling the country and covering voter issues for a long time, what I've learned, regardless of where people are on the political spectrum, what voters really want from their politicians is acknowledgement of the challenges that they're facing. They don't want it to be glazed over. Now, they are willing and ready and eager for debate over how to solve those problems. Like, I think there are plenty of people, Democrats included, who feel like there's too much crime wherever they live. Would they want the National Guard in their neighborhood? I don't know. They might think that's not the way to solve it, but I think that they want the challenges acknowledged, and there's a danger for any politician of red, blue, purple to brush over what are really serious concerns for voters.
And that brings us to the third big story of the day, which is the lead up to Friday's Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. We learned yesterday that President Trump will have a call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and with other high-level European leaders ahead of this meeting with Putin. And this morning, Dasha, you have some fresh reporting on a bit of expectation setting that's happening from the White House. What are you hearing ahead of this monumental summit?
Yeah, I was struck yesterday in the briefing. The president was asked a lot about his expectations, his goals, what he wants to walk away from Alaska with. And he was very, very, very hesitant to answer that in any sort of clear way. And I was talking to my White House sources about his answers, and they explained that the goal right now is not to get boxed in any way. They don't want to set any clear expectations. They don't want to draw any clear red lines because Putin is such an unpredictable character. And you've got another unpredictable character in Trump. And what really this comes down to for the people in Trump's orbit right now is they know that this is something that is a part of Trump's instincts. Like, he is going in there to sit across a table from this guy, and he is going to have to make the judgment call of whether or not Putin is serious about a peace deal and what his intentions actually are. And that's a really difficult position for any world leader to be in. Right now, the message from a lot of his White House allies is trust in Trump. But ultimately, they're not saying we want to walk out with a ceasefire. They're not saying we want to walk out with a deal or even the framework of a deal. They're saying that this is a major shift in that Putin asked for this meeting and the president is going and he's going to hear him out. But this is a massive inflection point, what happens in this summit. And it's just been fascinating to see how they're messaging it, which is he's going to go, they're going to have a chat.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the summit itself and the optics of it, the confrontational nature, the buzz factor involved here, that all seems very Trumpian to me. What doesn't seem Trumpian to me is the measured walk up, the expectation setting. How do you explain that dichotomy? Is it his staff doing the expectation setting?
Well, I mean, they're all doing it. He's doing it
Yeah.
too, which is one of the reasons I wanted to report this out because I was
Yeah.
just surprised that he wasn't up in that briefing room saying, like, we're going to get this done.
Yeah.
And I think that says a lot about what a major fork in the road this is. Look, President Zelensky is in a tough spot right now. He's probably weaker than he's been politically in a long time, given the corruption protests in his own country. Russia is also in a tough spot. They've had a really hard year. They've lost more people than they've expected. There is the looming threat of sanctions. And so this is that pivotal moment. However, it's with all of these characters that are unpredictable and all have their own political causes, that all have their own constituents in different ways that they're trying to serve. And so this could really go in two very different directions from what I'm hearing.
We'll certainly be monitoring this as this summit comes closer on Friday. As always, we try to end the show with something from the Playbook newsletter. And this morning, we have a very Playbook birthday before us. That's our own executive producer, Kyle Blaine's birthday. Happy birthday, Kyle.
Happy birthday, Kyle. We would be lost without you. Truly, every day I wake up, I think WWKD.
That's right.
What would Kyle do?
Kyle's always up at 5 a.m. sharp, checking our work and making this newsletter really shine and add some polish to it. So we're really grateful for him and his contributions and that he was born.
We're so glad you were born. Thank your mom for us.
As always, send us your tips, birthdays, or spotted moments to playbook@politico.com. Dasha, this was so fun. Thanks for being back and joining us.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody.
And that's all for today's Playbook podcast. We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.